Welcome to Conversations from the Couch. My name is James Chadwick. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a therapist at the Sexual Wellness Institute located outside Minneapolis. I do some sex and relationship therapy there, working across kind of a spectrum of different needs. And I'm joined by McCracken, and she will introduce herself and tell us a little bit more what she does.
Hi, I'm Mel McCracken. My pronouns are she, they. I am a substance use counselor and an associate sex addiction therapist. I currently work at Breathe Life Healing Center in West Hollywood, California, as the Chem-sex program manager. We have a specific track that are helping folks recover from sexualized drug use.
Awesome. Awesome. So glad to have you join us, or join me. So we're kind of talking about sexual health today within the LGBTQIA plus community. We've got an overview of kind of how we see different presenting concerns that we'll talk a little bit more in depth about, and then some kind of just general questions to follow that as well. So we'll be talking about kind of the history of sexual compulsivity and specifically chemsex. We'll talk about the impact of COVID, connection to HIV and the AIDS crisis. Yes, isolation in the community that's caused. Talk about the difference between problematic behaviors and addiction. We'll be discussing trauma, how that intersection between compulsive behavior and regulating emotions exists. We'll be discussing stigma inside and outside the community, especially related to chemsex. And then we'll finish out with some grounding techniques and interventions that we use, as well as just kind of general resilience and bouncing back. So yeah, why don't we just kind of start at the beginning? So where does this idea of sexual compulsivity kind of originate, and how has that spiraled over time? And just kind of weigh
in. Well, I guess in my experience, this has been a long-standing problem, and I trace it back to like the objectification and sexualization of queer peoples. Our sexual preference had much to do with identity. And I think that, culturally, that's how folks always viewed us, right? It's like homosexual, right? The only thing that's different about me from every other human on the planet is my sexual preference. And so I think in turn, like we've kind of adopted that into the community and really started to lead with sexuality, and have that be our first marker of identification. So I think a lot of folks have ideas about compulsive sexual behaviors, especially around the history. And I really think it goes all the way back to the diagnosis of being a homosexual, and like my sexuality kind of, up for debate in all sorts of ways over time.
Right. Yeah, very well said. I think it is really long-standing, and I think about kind of maybe 1960s, 1970s as kind of, when the DSM took homosexuality out of the DSM in the 70s, that is kind of a transitional point. And then also, when you're talking, I was kind of thinking about the caste identity model too, which I know is a little bit outdated, but looking at those 6 stages of kind of coming out and identifying in sexual orientation or in gender identity, and that 5th stage of like, it's just all gay all the time, or all LGBTQIA all the time. And that's all that people see. Definitely tying that back to what you're saying about like kind of leading with sexual orientation or gender identity and being objectified that way. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, long-standing kinds of things and things to think about within the community, for sure.
We've adopted that as well, and it's continued to be a projection within the community. These aren't just exterior forces looking in. this is something that, self-sexualization, self-objectification, apps, websites, all of those things also kind of contribute to just one identity around one's sexual preference. So
Absolutely.
I find it very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so skipping ahead a little bit from 60s, 70s, and I know it obviously predates that, to 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the advent of the AIDS crisis. What kinds of ramifications do you think that has on, stigma and, quote unquote, sexual acting out? How did that kind of shape the community?
There are so many parts to that question, and so many answers to go along with that. But I really think that, one, I want to note that, like, because of the HIV/AIDS crisis in the 80s and the 90s, you know, people today are missing an entire generation
Mhm.
of sages, of mentors, of folks that pass along very valuable historical information about, like, who we are, what we fought for, and kind of where we came from and the trajectory of where we're going.
Mhm.
So in the work that I do, I see a lot of gay men really struggling to identify or find mentors, right? Or they didn't have any in adolescence. And, the impact of the AIDS crisis and, of all the people we lost as a result of, is really felt in the younger generations, because they don't have folks to look up to. They don't
Yeah.
have people to guide them. They don't have people to really educate them on some of the valuable information that is passed along, not in textbook, but like that oral tradition, right?
Yeah.
We're missing that in our culture. And you know a lot of the things that we do here is like helping folks identify values and
Yeah.
principles, and those are things that are, we kind of adopt, I think, earlier in our lives, based on, either parents or caregivers, which for a lot of folks that are LGBTQ, that's not someone that's available to you.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
missing this generation of folks to pass along like some of those instilled values and some of those principles, that we live by culturally, has had a really big impact in the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm getting chills just hearing you talk about that, and it's so impactful. And we talk about representation a lot, and it's just absent. And there's no, I mean, there's kind of trying to be visible, be out and proud now, but we can't undo that. And it was such a devastating legacy that it left in our community, and I think continues to impact how people see themselves, and how people see their sexuality, or their sexual orientation or their
Mhm.
sexual behaviors, for sure.
I think like understanding like the roots of Pride itself, right?
Mhm.
Which was an
Right, right.
organization that was formed out of Los Angeles after the Black Cat riots, which preceded Stonewall by 2 years. And it actually
Mm.
stands for Personal Rights and Defense and Education. And, a lot of folks hear that and they're like, wait, what? And
Yeah.
it was an organization that was set up to bail people out, the social justice warriors that
Mm.
were, out there living their lives despite like the political climate or the cultural climate or
Yeah.
socioeconomic status. It was really set up to defend and educate those who had been persecuted for gender or sexual identity.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I'm learning, and I so appreciate that input.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I think that persecution, and then later the AIDS crisis, and I guess now, what we're seeing with meth abuse and chemsex, just like, do we have, this is kind of a rhetorical question, but I would love your take on it. Do we have kind of a rallying point as a community? Or maybe it's safety and gun violence with, all the shootings that are happening. I mean, just here in Minneapolis, there was a gun threat at a club down the street from me. So I don't know if that's going to be something that centralizes the community and helps us to be stronger and unified, or what that looks like. And I know we've got a lot of ground to cover, so just kind of whatever your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I really, as a community, we are a community that's built on resilience.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't really have a foundation to address these issues.
Yeah.
We're kind of scattered and we're a little fragmented, and there are little pop-ups in different cities. But like, I think we need some organizational principles. One, to fight like the meth crisis. It's undermining a whole bunch of queer communities and queer families, and is increasingly devastating due to the changes in the composition of meth. But we need leaders. Yeah. This is what I say. Like, we need leaders, because we are a community that is more than willing to take action and engage in our resiliency in the face of adversity. But I think we need folks that are going to step up as leaders in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, sometimes that kind of takes root organically, and sometimes it comes from outside pressure, and sometimes it just doesn't come, or it doesn't come right away. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So and then I guess, we kind of got into present day, and COVID certainly has exacerbated so many of these concerns, and everything from depression, anxiety, isolation, communication. I definitely see a lot of impacts, negatively on sexuality and relationships related to COVID, and just strains there. And kind of switching gears a little bit, just in the sake of time, what would you say for people, and this is going to be kind of a hot button, I think, given our community and the sexual health community, the importance of differentiating between, so-called problematic sexual behaviors and so-called sex addiction? Like, is what's in a name?
I think there's a lot in a name. Right. And for a community that wears a lot of labels, I really, although I am trained and treat sex addiction, that's not necessarily how I'm going to approach someone.
Right.
Compulsive or impulsive sexual behaviors that compromise safety. Right? And so, and that's across the board. That's with like problematic gambling or shopping or substance use. And I just, kind of relate that to sex as well. Is this something that is interfering with your quality of life? Is this something that is continuously compromising your safety? Are you unable to show up for your responsibilities? And really looking at the compulsive or impulsive nature rather than the addiction piece of it, right? So compulsive and impulsive behaviors often stem from emotional dysregulation or an inability to kind of be with oneself and their body. And I really see that as like those roots being from trauma. Right?
Yep.
So, and if we can kind of let go a little bit of labels and really view these through a non-biased, shame-free lens of, oh, I have a person that's acting out. And like I said, whether it's drugs, sex, shopping, doesn't matter, that's acting out to try and regulate their nervous system, then I need to look at the core issue of the injury to the nervous system, because that in itself is trauma.
Correct.
Right? So we do a lot of work around that. And I think it's very, relieving to hear that, like, this is not a moral failing. This is not about, sex. It's more about my inability to manage and cope with symptoms of trauma. And so I'm seeking relief through problematic behavior.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm definitely down with that. I think trying to externalize the behavior as much as possible is huge. And trying, I just said, it's my Minnesotan coming out. It is important, and helping people to live shame-free and stigma-free, and not fuse shame with sexuality. I think that can be such
Right.
a burden for people. So yeah, and that was a great kind of tie into
I
trauma.
love what you just said, though, like fusing shame into sexuality.
Mhm.
Because for a lot of folks, again, we're missing this entire generation of people who really could have led the way and showed people how to be queer, quote.
Yeah, yeah,
But so a lot of people kind of came into sexuality in a very dualistic way, where they're living two lives, where they're in an unsafe part of the country or the world, where they can't live out loud. So a
absolutely.
lot of sexual expression and sexual behavior and just early sexual experiences are often fused with shame. They're fused with shame and secrecy and fear. In I'm going to share disclose a little bit about me. In my experience, I did not grow up, or come into, my own sexuality in a very friendly place.
Mhm.
So it was very dangerous for me
Mhm.
to be anything but straight acting. And a lot
Mhm.
of my early experiences as an adolescent, which is totally, human and natural, were often done in the shadows and they were done in the dark.
Yeah.
And it wasn't anything that I could live out loud through. So what began to happen as a result is, secrecy, fear, shame, and substance use
Yeah.
got intermingled with an arousal template and with desire.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I see that a lot, especially in the guys
Yep.
with sexualized drug use,
Yep.
is that because of this early template of arousal that involves shame, secrecy, and fear, they tend to act out in that way in adulthood. So it's really
Yes.
divorcing and untangling some of the early wiring that starts to happen and the neurobiology of one's arousal template.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, a great mention there of the integration of the arousal template and some of that shame, and then also sometimes substance use and abuse. Um, and I think that's a great. I really appreciate the vulnerability, and I think that's a great kind of segue into you know external and internal sources of shame and stigma. We've talked a little bit about just kind of society at large and some of the problems that come with that and bias and stigma, discrimination, oppression, all of that. Sometimes some people say I might say, and I'm open to being wrong for sure. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies. There's a um, huge intra community kind of relational aggression. That's something that I'm really interested in and wanting to write more about is relational aggression within the community. I don't know if you have thoughts about kind of how that fuels substance abuse, chemsex, or other kinds of compulsive sexual behaviors.
Absolutely. I think we lack a bit of self acceptance. And, watching that internalized oppression, I will say I'm not like the biggest fan of the word internalized homophobia because it's not that I'm scared of myself.
Right,
It's that I am self destructive because I am who I am.
right.
And I see that projected over and over in the community. I'm thinking about apps in the tribes, and even some of the labels that are put on people within the community. The message a lot of times is if you're not this, then you don't belong here.
Right.
If I'm not masked, I don't belong here.
Right.
If I'm in a larger body, I don't belong here. So there's a lot of this covert and overt messaging within the community, in the gyms, in the apps, in the websites that say, unless you're this type of gay or LGBTQ person, you are not included in the
Right.
community. And I
Right.
and I watch it over and over again. And I think, outside from apps being like a digital drug dealer, especially with the people that I work with, right? There's like the decreased value of one's self.
Mm. Mhm.
There's the decrease in self-esteem or self-worth based on scrolling through an endless sea of torsos that don't reflect my body type or who
Right.
I am. And
Right.
I think for this reason I'm going to touch on this because eating disorders, especially in gay men, are
Right.
running rampant through the
Right.
community.
Right.
Body image issues are running rampant through the gay community. And I think it really depletes someone and they forget that they have inherent worth or value because they're trying to measure up to really unrealistic
Sure.
expectations. So when you talk about like oppression, that's the way that I see it kind of bleeding all over our community.
Yeah. 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 Really well said. Do you think that that is, fear-based and kind of like, okay, I'm going to project, my ideal, and I don't even want to say ideal because that's kind of warped. But a sort of an idealized version of what it means to be LGBTQIA or what it means to be gay, so that people come after that and they don't come after me and my flaws and whatever I'm presenting or not presenting to the world.
Totally. It's the mask we hide behind. Like our persona and our presentation is the mask that I use to hide vulnerability. Because,
Right.
for a lot of folks, being vulnerable was not a good thing. Being
Yeah.
vulnerable meant I was subjected to bullying or name calling or
Yeah.
abuse.
Yep.
So we learned, or I learned, how to hide vulnerability in a flash to protect
Absolutely.
myself, to preserve
Yeah.
safety.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Well, I think I mean we've got to start, definitely a great start on kind of framing, some of these concerns impacting the community. What would you say as kind of like some of your go-to, treatment modalities or interventions? What gives you hope? What inspires you? And what's like really tangible, that you can share with your clients? I know I'm still learning a lot of resources myself and different modalities and techniques. I like, mindfulness kind of approaches, really into kind of grounding, and I like the Seeking Safety manual. But I think it's so, like you've pointed out, it's so deeply rooted and so ingrained and multi-generational traumas. I'm definitely curious to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you mentioned the Seeking Safety. I think that is such a good resource, right? Because that is the problem. The very nature of the problem or any problematic behavior is my inability to feel comfortable or safe in my own body.
Mhm.
And a lot of the work I think around addressing sexualized drug use is really body focused. It's somatic focused, right? Because sex lives in the body, and addiction, problematic use lives in the brain. So we have these two things that have now been fused together. So I think it's really important to really do kind of a toes to nose, is what I like to call it. So as a bottom up style of regulation, because my feet are what's moving me to the door that might open, that a relapse might be behind.
Right.
So in really recognizing like cues of safety, cues of danger, and really getting more comfortable in my body and bringing into awareness some of the things that might happen before I'm going out and using,
Right.
right? Like some people get flushed, some people hands get swollen, some people have, a difference in heart rate. Like
Right.
there have been many things that I've been kind of I'm tracking over the years so people can understand that like when their body is dysregulated,
Right.
a lot of times the thoughts will occur after, not before. But
Right.
it's a very fine line, but helping folks understand the mechanisms of like symptoms of trauma
Yep.
specifically,
Yep.
right? Increased
Yep.
anxiety, increased depression. A lot of those things have very physical symptoms as well. So things like holotropic breath work. I'm a holotropic breathwork practitioner. I love it because the way that you breathe during a holotropic breathwork session shuts off your rational mind. It shuts
Mhm.
off the thought process. It drops you in from the neck down. So you're not really thinking, but what you are doing is you are working with the emotional body and you're working with the autonomic nervous system and kind of getting both of those things offline for people that have continued to suppress, whether that's, through like suppressing anger, which turns into depression, or even suppressing other emotional landscapes by use of like substances. I think holotropic breath work allows just a space of safety, right? And also, there's an increase of oxytocin. So, for people that struggle to feel safe in their body, They get a nice dose of oxytocin, which, if you don't know, is the cuddle hormone. It's the one that mothers and babies have when they're first connected. So
Mhm.
there's an internal sense of safety in an individual that might engage in this practice. And I like to do that like once a week with my clients. It's super
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. Yeah. And absolutely like looking for patterns and sequences and antecedents, because I think, like you pointed out, it's so much easier. Well, it's not easy, but it's easier to, kind of target some of these sequences earlier on before you're at, the drug dealer, or you've got the substance, or you're in coitus, or whatever it is. Trying to say, okay, well, something happened much before that. Can I redirect from there? And taking that agency. Yeah, absolutely. Um, awesome. Well, I'm just trying to think too, like, are there um other things as far as like building resilience and community? I know we've talked a lot about community, and I think there are a lot of challenges and barriers to that, and a lot of the things that you pointed out as far as like um gatekeeping and oppression within the community. So like what are some things that we as practitioners can encourage our clients to do to build that community and have that sort of communal resilience?
Mhm. I mean, I'm a big fan of like any 12-step program,
Okay.
right? Because, peer support, like, although I identify as a person in recovery, I'm not peer support. But peer support is so influential. People need to be able to empathize, to have understanding, to feel like they are a part of something, that they are included. To share their stories, which alleviates shame. And shame is one of the main
Mm,
drivers of the cycle. So
mhm.
when I'm in a room full of people that understand what I'm going through or have been through similar experiences, and I'm talking about that, and I'm able to, kind of neurocept that empathy,
Yeah,
that in itself is groundbreaking.
yeah,
And it alleviates a lot of the shame or guilt that people may have about problematic behavior, right? So
yep,
I'm a huge fan of any sort of 12-step Dharma, smart recovery, any sort of community where people are, engaged in abstinence and moving towards a communal goal
yeah,
of, for some it might be long-term sobriety, for some it may just be to slow down, right? There's a
yep,
lot of harm reduction groups that I think are
yep,
super important as well.
yeah,
um, Another thing, I guess, that I really find useful, especially when working with sexualized drug use, is to look at patterns of use,
mhm,
right? Like doing a relapse calendar, because a lot of times, we deal with methamphetamine and GHB, and those are kind of binge purge cycles, right?
right,
They're not necessarily like continuous use, like an alcoholic or even an
yeah,
opioid addict, but
right,
they're binge purge cycles. So someone might be using, once a month. And then, as that goes on, they might be using twice a month. So I think it's really important to help people identify like their relapse cycles, because once we've identified that, we know what's going to happen, right? So if
right,
you're using every 2 weeks and your use has been on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Tuesday, Wednesday, before that day comes, you're going to be feeling a little weird. You're going to feel
yeah,
like anxious or
yeah,
depressed or activated. So I think just having that insight and really looking at your history around substance use and substance abuse and maybe substance addiction is essential to knowing kind of that internal clock, right? Because our minds become conditioned
yeah,
to receiving substances at a certain time or a certain day or even a certain month. um,
yeah,
so that's something that I find really helpful, and also looking at people's rebuild cycles.
right, right,
That,
yeah,
if I'm a problematic, if my use is around the problematic, maybe moving into addiction, and I am using every 2 weeks. And then after use, I'm replenishing. All of a sudden I'm vegan. I quit smoking. I'm going to the gym 3 times a day. And really what I'm doing is we talked a little bit about that projection of image. What I'm doing is I'm making sure that my image on the outside is looking
right,
well and fine, but
right,
not addressing like some of the internal issues on the inside, or, not even being willing to put stock in my emotional health. I'm only putting stock in my physical health.
Right.
I see that happen over and over again. And it's just this overwhelm that is exterior focused.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not necessarily like what's going on in the inside, it's how I look on the outside. So, we talk a lot about like that rebuild cycle. Like, what does that look like for you? If you're going to the gym 3 times a day, 7 days a week, right after relapses, that's something to look at.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of a hyper compensation. It makes me think of this might be cut out. Unpretty by TLC, just kind of that dichotomy between, what I'm presenting and what I'm actually feeling. I think maybe reaction formation, or there's something else to do with impression management is maybe the psychological parlance, but we're switching chairs proverbially. I want to say that I wish I was in Southern California right now because it's snowing here.
I mean, I don't know if you can see outside.
I can see it. It's green.
It's green and
it looks really good.
Let me ask you this, because this is a question that comes up a lot, especially in sexual recovery, right?
Mhm.
What is healthy sex? What does that even mean?
Wow. That's the million or multi-million dollar question, I suppose, isn't it? And I think, and this is maybe kind of a cop-out or something, but sometimes I think it's kind of like excavation, and it's going inward, and it's like, okay, I have some things that I know are not working for me that I would maybe term unhealthy, maybe compulsive, maybe problematic. I know that language is always shifting. But I really do like the 3 circles model, because I think that helps give people kind of a visual model of like, okay, I've got an idea to do something. Where does it land? And it's not necessarily going to steer me clear of doing it if it's something that's harmful to me, but at least I have kind of a classification or a categorization of what it's going to be like for me. So obviously we're not cookie cutters. I can't give, do this, don't do this type response to that question. But I think doing the work and working with, a very skilled therapist or clinician to kind of come up with a plan, a healthy sexuality plan with goals, with value identification, that's going to be a huge guide for people. A lot of times we just have values that we're not even really that aware of. So really bringing that to the fore, letting that kind of shape and guide sexual behaviors. And yeah, and I don't know about you, I would imagine this is probably the case for you or similar. But I get into trouble sometimes with, having a lot of sex positivity and really, having that be something that guides a lot of what I say and do. And then also just this kind of counter knowledge that like, yeah, there are facets of sex that can be really destructive, and trying to, merge those two and help clients, with those parts of their personalities too. So I don't know if that fully answered the question. And I really wish that I had like the definitive answer. So.
Well, I mean, yeah, sex is subjective, and one's sexual preference and sexuality also subjective. So, one plan is going to look very different from another person's plan. And that term, I will say, like the term healthy sex, I don't know. Sometimes I think I am a little uncomfortable using that. Like, because it almost, I don't know, it adds a little bit of shame, like, oh, I'm having unhealthy sex, I'm not healthy. I don't know. I go back and forth with that one, but I think it's a really important question to ask. And I guess the way that we define it is like, you mentioned sex positivity. I'm a very sex positive person. And for me, that just means I want you to feel good about what you're doing.
Right.
Like,
right.
I want it to be a wonderful, shame-free, enticing experience. I don't want you to feel bad about it the next day. I don't want you to have remorse or guilt or shame. And for me, that's, kind of the very nature of being sex positive. It doesn't mean like, yay, go out and have a lot of sex. It means the sex that you're having is a very connected,
Right.
informed experience.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I run into that a lot, especially with people in sexual recovery.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, you're not sex positive. And I'm like, actually, I am. I'm actually just asking you to take a closer look
Mhm.
at behaviors that aren't getting you closer to your sexual values, and behaviors that aren't contributing to you feeling aligned in your sexual
Absolutely.
self, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love to do like use a lot of internal family systems work
Mhm.
around problematic sexual behaviors, because I think there is an erotic self, right? And when we think about self energy, there's this erotic self. There's the, that is curious and
Yes.
really wants to explore one's sexuality. And I think that's an innate human quality. Is we are
Yeah.
sexual
Yep.
beings,
Yep.
and not letting these manager parts kind of get in the way, managing impressions, or managing relationships, or managing my ability to even like connect, right?
Yep.
And then there's the relief seeking sexual behaviors that aren't getting you any closer to how you want to feel,
Right.
and you're just trying to regulate. And those are the parts that I want to look at. And the part that I
Yeah.
really want to uncover and explore is like your erotic self. Like, what do you really want
Yes.
out of sex?
Yes.
So,
Absolutely.
oh my gosh, that question can go a long ways, but I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
appreciated your answer.
Yeah, no, I think curiosity is such a potent word. I love that, and awareness and insight. And yeah, I mean, I think developmentally, from an evolutionary perspective, yeah, we have, and Bowlby and attachment, like we have curiosity about our environments.
Mhm.
And to be successful, I think successful in navigating that, we have to usually exercise some caution and work with our resources and check in a little bit to see that that's okay. And I don't think that you know is altered dramatically in adulthood. I think we can still use our resources. And I just want to say, I'm so grateful for your contributions. I'm so grateful for, the field. There's so many great ideas going around, and I like that we can be cohesive with them. And this idea that I picked up recently, um, is, kind of looking at euphoria instead of dysphoria. So, when you pose questions about healthy sex, whatever that means,
Mhm.
what's the best that could happen? I mean, we spend so much time pathologizing and so much time saying, okay, what are the consequences? What are the bad things that happen to you when you engage in this kind of behavior?
Mhm.
What's the best that could happen? You
Yeah, what
know?
do I have to gain? Yes.
Yep. Yep.
Consequences have never kept addicts sober.
Right. Right.
Ever.
It's
Like,
true. It's
I
true.
mean, but what you're saying is so important. What do I have to gain? What's in front of me? What can I look towards? Like, what do I
Yep.
envision for
Yes.
myself, not only in sex, but just like, what are the relationships that I want to have in my life? So I really appreciate you bringing that to the table, because I'm not one that's like, oh, bad things are going to happen if you do this. No, good things are going to happen if you do this.
Right.
And it really frames and it really draws on one's internal motivation and be loved. So
Yes.
I really
Yes.
appreciate that you shared that.
Yeah, well, I borrowed it actually. Ash Troy out of New York is who I got that from. So thanks to that.
Nice. Love it.
Yep, yep, yep. So many great mentors. I can't name them all, and so happy to be joined by you today. Yeah. So, well, Mel, it's been such a pleasure having you on, and really, really, really appreciate everything that you've shared. And we'll be doing a webinar together with SASH. Coming up later in May this spring. So look for that. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their winter and into spring. And we'll catch you later.